But when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic text.
Somewhere under Jerusalem, a silver scroll, no bigger than a cigarette, waited nearly 2,700 years to be found. Then, in a locked laboratory in Athens, scientists uncovered something that could rewrite the timeline of Scripture. And in a burial cave south of the Old City, workers found the bones of the man who sent Jesus Christ to his death. Each discovery offers a glimpse into a world known mostly through Scripture, but one may force you to see the Bible differently. Number 10. The machine that made the scrolls older. Back in 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-H. Dib was searching for a stray goat near Qumran. He tossed a stone into a cave, expecting to hear it hit rock. Instead, he heard pottery shatter. That single sound led to the discovery of close to 1,000 ancient manuscripts hidden across 11 caves, including the Great Isaiah Scroll, a copy of the Book of Isaiah more than 1,000 years older than anything scholars had ever held in their hands before. For decades, the age of these scrolls was decided almost entirely by handwriting style, a method scholars themselves admit is more art than science. Then, in June of 2025, a team out of the University of Groningen, led by Professor Mladen Popovic, published a study introducing an artificial intelligence model they named Enoch. Several scrolls were pushed back in age by decades, and 2 fragments landed in the late 4th century before Christ, meaning they may date to the actual lifetimes of the people who first wrote them. Earlier, radiocarbon results on some of these scrolls were quietly thrown off for years because conservators had coated the parchment in castor oil while handling it, and that modern oil skewed the readings younger than the true age. Before Enoch could even be trained properly, scientists had to go back and run fresh radiocarbon tests on 30 separate manuscripts just to undo that old contamination. Professor Popovic called it a new door opening into the ancient world, but he was careful to admit that not every colleague agrees yet. Paleographers are still fighting him on some of the individual dates. There is a verse in Isaiah that says, "The word of our God stands forever," and honestly, once you know scientists just proved parts of that word are even older than anyone believed, it hits differently. But the very next discovery on this list has torn the world of biblical scholarship apart for 3 years straight, and there are respected experts who think it proves nothing at all. Number 9. The curse that will not die. In December of 2019, a team led by Dr. Scott Stripling was wet, sifting through old excavation dump piles left behind from a 1980s dig on Mount Ebal in the West Bank. Buried in that discarded dirt, they found a tiny folded piece of lead, roughly the size of a fingernail. In March of 2022, Stripling made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the field. He claimed the object contained a folded curse inscription bearing an early form of God's name, which would make it the oldest known Hebrew inscription ever discovered, older even than the famous Khirbet Caiaphas Ostrakon. The formal peer-reviewed paper did not appear until May of 2023, and that is when the real fighting began. Professor Christopher Rolston of George Washington University looked at the published scans and said flatly that what he saw were ordinary striations from lead handling, with no discernible letters at all. Professor Amihai Mazar, emeritus at Hebrew University, went further and suggested the object was nothing more than a common fishing net weight, the kind of everyday tool that would have been thrown away without a second thought. Then a separate metal analysis traced the lead itself back to mines in Greece, which only complicated things further. And in 2024, a formal rebuttal argued the object was roughly 7 centuries too early to even belong to the category Stripling claimed, since folded curse tablets like this simply are not documented anywhere in the region until the Greek world, centuries later. Stripling has never backed down. He calls the fishing weight theory very problematic, and as of this year, nobody in the field has settled the argument either way. The man who first found the next artifact on our list, one that predates the Dead Sea Scrolls by 4 centuries, passed away only months before we sat down to write this very script. Number 8. The blessing buried under the city. In 1979, archaeologist Gabriel Barkay was excavating burial caves at Ketef Hinnom, a ridge just southwest of Jerusalem's Old City, working alongside a crew that included teenage volunteers. Inside one of the burial chambers, his team pulled out 2 tightly rolled silver amulets. The larger one, once unrolled, was barely the size of a stick of gum. Both museums first approached to open them said no, terrified the fragile silver would simply crumble to dust. It took conservators at the Israel Museum roughly 3 years to develop a method safe enough to try. When they finally succeeded, what they read stopped everyone in the room. The inscriptions matched the priestly blessing found in the Book of Numbers, plus language echoing Deuteronomy. They were dated to the late 7th or early 6th century before Christ, making them the oldest known fragment of any biblical text in existence, roughly 4 centuries older than the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. 1 year after Barkay's team made that discovery, archaeologists on the other side of Israel uncovered a mosaic so sensitive that officials are still fighting over who even has the right to display it. Number 7. The mosaic nobody was allowed to see. In 2005, Israeli archaeologist Yotam Tepper was leading a routine salvage excavation ahead of a planned prison expansion in northern Israel. What his team found underneath was anything but routine. It was the floor of what many scholars now believe is the world's earliest known Christian prayer hall, dated to around the year 230. Epigraphist Leah Dysegni translated the central inscription and found something remarkable. A dedication from a woman named Akeptos, crediting her with donating a table almost certainly used for the Eucharist, dedicated to God Jesus Christ. That phrase alone matters more than it might seem, because it predates the moment centuries later when the doctrine of Christ's divinity was formally defined by the Church. Because this floor sits inside an active maximum security prison holding Palestinian detainees, ordinary people were barred from ever seeing it in person for close to 2 decades. In 2023, the Israel Antiquities Authority began considering a loan of this mosaic to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, a private institution founded by the family behind Hobby Lobby. Archaeologists and academics pushed back hard, pointing to that museum's rocky history with returning looted artifacts to Iraq and its close ties to political networks in the United States. The objections did not matter. The loan went through anyway, and the mosaic left Israeli soil to open at the museum in Washington around September of 2024. Which means most people who have ever laid eyes on the earliest known place Christians gathered to worship Jesus as God saw it for the first time in an American gallery, not in Israel, where it was found. Barely 30 miles from that mosaic, another site tied directly to Jesus himself is only half excavated, and the digging is happening as we speak. Number 6. The pool they are still digging up. In 2004, archaeologists Ronnie Reich and Eli Shukran were checking a routine sewer repair site in Jerusalem's City of David when they hit stone steps belonging to an enormous ritual pool. The setting matched the Gospel of John, where Jesus healed a man born blind by sending him to wash in the Pool of Siloam. The pool itself dated back to the reign of King Hezekiah, fed by the Gihon Spring, and once covered an area roughly the size of 1.25 acres. For years, only a tiny corner of it could be reached, because most of the pool sat under privately owned farmland. Then, in December of 2022, the land finally changed hands, and for the first time in roughly 2,000 years, the entire pool could be excavated. Digging began in January of 2023 under archaeologist Nahshon Santon, and by September of that same year, 8 ancient steps that had not seen daylight in 2 millennia were finally exposed. Officials have compared the sheer volume of dirt still left to remove to emptying 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools by hand. This dig is nowhere close to finished. While excavating the dam feeding into the pool, Santon's team found evidence the site may have functioned as a water storage complex more than a century before Hezekiah ever ruled, which quietly complicates the simple story most of us grew up hearing, where Hezekiah alone gets the credit for building it. Zeev Orenstein of the City of David Foundation has called this excavation one of the clearest affirmations of the ancient bond shared by Jews and Christians with this very ground. Then comes Number 5. The 2 words that ended a debate. For decades, a certain group of scholars insisted King David was invented long after any real reign, closer to folklore than fact. Then, on July 21, 1993, at Tel Dan in northern Israel, during excavations directed by Avraham Biran, a fragment of a shattered basalt monument turned up among stones that had been reused in an ancient wall. Carved into it was old Aramaic text describing a king boasting that he had defeated the king of Israel and the king of the house of David. It was the first confirmed mention of David's dynasty ever found outside the Bible. Biran did not actually spot the fragment himself. It was Gila Cook, the dig's architect, who noticed strange lettering on a stone she was simply measuring near the ancient gate, and she was the one who ran to bring Biran back to look. History gave the credit to the man in charge, but the discovery itself belongs to his architect, a woman whose name most people have never even heard. There is a second layer to this story worth knowing. The stele had been deliberately smashed in ancient times, and its pieces reused as ordinary building material in a later wall, which means the very people who tried to erase this evidence of David's dynasty ended up accidentally preserving it inside their own construction. Even the original scholars who published the find admitted the main fragments cannot be joined together in any perfectly obvious way, a small caveat that almost never gets mentioned outside academic circles. Not every photo on this list proves a place existed or a text was real. One of them may have physically held the bones of the man who condemned Jesus to death. Number 4. The bones of the man who condemned Jesus. In December of 1990, construction crews building a park south of Jerusalem's Old City accidentally broke into a sealed burial cave that had sat undisturbed since the 1st century. Inside were 12 limestone bone boxes. Archaeologist Zvi Greenhut was called in, and when his team examined the boxes closely, 2 of them bore an inscription that stopped everyone cold, the name Caiaphas. The most elaborate box, decorated with carved rosettes, was inscribed twice in Aramaic with the words Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Inside were the remains of a man roughly 60 years old, alongside an adult woman and several children. Historians connect this directly to Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest named in the Gospels of Matthew, Luke, and John as the man who presided over the trial of Jesus, a role also confirmed independently by the ancient historian Josephus. The ossuary now sits in the Israel Museum, close to the Pilate stone, the same artifact that first proved Pontius Pilate was a real historical figure, and not just a name in Scripture. This inscription faced years of intense scrutiny before epigraphers Yuval Goren and Boaz Zissou were finally able to confirm the writing was genuine, and not a later addition designed to raise its value. There is a passage in the Gospel of Mark that describes the exchange between Jesus and the high priest at his trial, and it becomes a little harder to read once you know these might be the actual bones connected to that same office. The next site on this list sits behind a restricted military fence in a country most Bibles never even mention, and almost no photograph of it was ever taken under real scientific supervision. Number 3. The mountain behind the fence. In the 1980s, a Tennessee medical technologist turned self-taught explorer named Ron Wyatt made a claim that still divides people today. He argued the true Mount Sinai was not the traditional site in Egypt, home to St. Catherine's Monastery and honored by Christian pilgrims since at least the 4th century, but instead a mountain called Jabal al-Lawz, meaning Mountain of Almonds, across the Gulf of Aqaba, inside Saudi Arabia. Supporters point to the mountain's darkened summit, ancient stone enclosures, boundary markers, and carvings of cattle they connect to the golden calf from the Book of Exodus. Nearby sits a separate rock formation known as the Split Rock of Horeb, documented in the early 1990s by an American couple, Jim and Penny Caldwell, who were living in Saudi Arabia at the time. The boulder stands roughly 60 feet tall, split cleanly from top to bottom, and some believers argue its erosion pattern resembles the aftermath of a massive release of water, tied to the moment in Exodus, where Moses strikes a rock and water pours out. Mainstream geologists say the mountain's dark summit is simply naturally weathered volcanic rock, and describe the split boulder as a completely ordinary formation in a region full of tectonic activity. Even Dr. Glenn Fritz, a geographer who supports a different nearby peak as the true Sinai, has publicly disputed that this particular rock is the biblical rock of Horeb, and he changed his own position after visiting the site in person. Much of Wyatt's broader catalog of claimed discoveries has been rejected by nearly the entire archaeological community, including people who once defended him. Saudi authorities heavily restrict access to this entire area, and visitors have reported being escorted away by police. That means almost none of the dramatic photographs you may have seen online were ever taken under any real independent scientific observation. Then we have number 2, the tunnel two teams dug blind. More than 2,700 years ago, King Hezekiah ordered his engineers to cut a tunnel straight through solid bedrock, designed to funnel water from the Gihon Spring safely inside Jerusalem's walls ahead of an expected siege. The finished tunnel snakes roughly 1,750 feet through solid rock, and visitors can still walk through it today, ankle-deep in the same spring water. In 1880, a local boy exploring the tunnel discovered something remarkable carved near its exit: 6 lines of ancient Hebrew known today as the Siloam inscription. It describes 2 separate digging crews, working from opposite ends of the mountain with nothing but hand tools and sound, who could hear each other's picks striking rock as they got closer, and who finally broke through to meet each other in the middle. The inscription no longer sits anywhere near Jerusalem. It was removed from the wall shortly after its discovery, and now rests inside the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, far from the tunnel it once described. One tomb on this list was opened for the first time in centuries, and the same scientists who dated it also found something inside its foundation that officials have never fully explained to the public. Number 1. The tomb nobody was supposed to open. Christian tradition has honored one site in Jerusalem's Old City as the location of Christ's crucifixion, burial, and resurrection since at least the 4th century, when historical accounts describe Emperor Constantine and his mother Helena locating the tomb beneath what had been a pagan temple. The structure was nearly destroyed in the year 1009 and rebuilt multiple times since by different communities, and for generations, many scholars quietly wondered whether anything original had actually survived underneath all that reconstruction. The 3 communities that jointly control the site, Greek Orthodox, Catholic, and Armenian, finally agreed in 2016 to allow a restoration team from the National Technical University of Athens, led by Professor Antonia Moropoulo, to open the burial bed for the first time in centuries. On October 26th of that year, restorers lifted the top marble slab and found a second, older marble slab underneath it, carved with a cross. In the final hours before the tomb had to be resealed ahead of Easter, they finally reached the original limestone burial surface itself, still fully intact after all those centuries. Mortar samples pulled from between the limestone and the marble were independently tested at 2 separate laboratories, and both landed at approximately the year 345, placing the construction squarely in the era of Constantine and lining up almost exactly with the ancient historical accounts. But there is a second finding that received almost none of the attention the dating headlines got. There is a line in the Gospel of Matthew where an angel tells the women at the tomb that he is not here, for he has risen just as he said. And once you know this shrine has now been scientifically dated to the exact era history always claimed and quietly sits at risk of collapse, that line carries a weight it never had before. Tell us in the comments which one of these 10 hit you the hardest and why.